They say the hardest part of a coma isn't the waking up, it's finding out the world didn't just move on without you. It moved right into your living room. I pulled up to my driveway after 15 months of darkness, ribs still aching and my head feeling like it was stuffed with wet wool, only to find a wrought iron gate where my gravel path used to be. My private lake, the one I'd spent my life savings on to find a little peace, was covered in Adirondack chairs and tourists in flip-flops. But the real kicker? The bronze plaque near the new clubhouse that read, "Generously donated by the late Randall Denton." That's me. I am Randall. And I was standing there, very much not late, while the HOA president handed me my own death certificate and told me I was trespassing on community assets. If you told me 10 years ago I'd end up as a ghost in rural Missouri, I would have laughed in your face and gone back to my federal hydrology charts. I spent 20 years buried in numbers, flow rates, sediment levels, water tables, arguing with bureaucrats who thought a river was something you only saw on a screensaver. That world grind a man down. It tried its best with me, anyway. So I cashed out, sold the Denver condo, and drove until the air smelled like pine and wet dirt. I found those 27 acres tucked behind a stand of red oaks, and for the first time in my life, things made sense. I rebuilt that sagging cabin with my own two hands. Every stone in the foundation, every cedar plank, I measured twice, cut once, and bled on most of them. The lake was my sanctuary. Mornings were a prayer of mist and silence. Evenings were just me in a kayak, watching the sky turn honey gold. It was honest, earned peace, and I protected it. The nearby neighborhood, Lakeside Haven, was one of those cookie-cutter nightmares. Identical houses, stone mailboxes, and an HOA that sent out more letters than the post office. I wasn't part of them. My land was outside their boundary, and I planned to keep it that way. But then came Karen Woodley. She marched onto my property 2 weeks after I moved in, wearing a cream-colored pantsuit like she was headed to a war room. She had that rigid, silver blonde hair and a smile that never quite made it to her eyes. She tried to welcome me, but I could see her eyes wandering over my shoreline, calculating the value, measuring the potential. I gave her the polite nod I usually save for tax auditors and went back to my trench. I thought that was it. But peace has a way of whispering a warning before it leaves you. It started with a drone, that mechanical hum like a fly with a grudge hovering over my water. Then a black SUV idling at my fence line. Then, 2 weeks before the accident, I caught a guy on my land with a surveyor's tool. Mid-20s, ball cap pulled low, and a very specific, jagged black tattoo wrapped around his left wrist. When I yelled at him, he bolted like a thief. I should have listened to my gut, but the mind likes comfort, so I told myself it was nothing. Then came the rain, just a cold Missouri mist that made the asphalt look like a dark mirror. I was heading home at 8:21 p.m. I remember the dashboard clock, thinking about calling my sister, Linda. Then headlights. Too bright, too fast. This truck didn't just drift, it targeted me. For a split second, our lights aligned, and I saw him. Broad shoulders, the ball cap, and that jagged black tattoo on his wrist. The impact felt like the world folding sideways. Metal screaming, glass exploding, and then nothing. Just a silent, endless void. I woke up 8 months later in a haze of bleach and beeping monitors. But I wasn't Randall Denton anymore. My ID was gone, my phone was scrap metal, and my face was a mess. They called me John Doe, and while I lay there nameless, the vultures started circling. A guy named Donald Pierce, supposedly a social worker, filed a provisional death report. He claimed I died on impact. It was a lie, obviously, but in a small, overworked county, it was just enough to trigger a stewardship loophole for abandoned property. Karen and her HOA used that loophole like a crowbar to pry my life open. Even my sister, Linda, in her grief, was tricked into signing maintenance forms that were actually surrender papers. By the time I could walk, they'd changed my locks. By the time I could talk, they'd built a resort on my grave. Stepping out of rehab felt like falling out of my own story. I drove back to my lake, my heart hammering against my ribs, only to see the Willow Beach signs. My road was gated. My cabin? They'd wrapped my hand-hewn cedar in cheap beige vinyl. I peered through the window and saw a framed photo of a perfect family on my mantel. They hadn't just stolen my house, they'd erased my existence. That's when the black SUV pulled up. Karen stepped out, looking at me with this practiced mask of irritation. When I told her who I was, she didn't even flinch. She just tapped her clipboard and said, "Mr. Denton passed away last year. You're trespassing." She actually called the sheriff on a dead man. The deputy, a guy named Norris, looked at me like I was a ghost or a con artist. Without an ID and with a death notice on file, his hands were tied. He forced me off my own land while Karen stood there with that victorious, icy smile. I had to leave my own dirt, my backpack heavy with the realization that I was a ghost in my own life. But here's the thing about ghosts. They're hard to get rid of once they start haunting you. The next morning, I hit the county clerk's office. The air in there smelled like old coffee and secrets. The receptionist turned white when I gave my name. She showed me the filing, a one-page affidavit for my unrecoverable remains, signed by a clerk who'd conveniently resigned months ago. It was a hack job, so I went to see Marcus Patel. He's the kind of lawyer who doesn't just sue you, he surgically dismantles your soul. He listened to the whole story, the coma, the tattoo, the takeover, and for the first time in days, I saw a light at the end of the tunnel. "Randall," he said, leaning back, "this isn't just a property dispute. This is fraud, illegal transfer, and if that guy with the tattoo works for them, it's attempted murder." We spent the next week digging. We found out Donald Pierce wasn't a social worker. He was Karen Woodley's brother-in-law. We found the payroll for the resort staff, and wouldn't you know it, the guy with the tattoo was on the list. The final act didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened on my front porch. Marcus and I showed up with a court-ordered injunction and a pair of state marshals. Karen tried her trespassing routine again, but Marcus just handed her a stack of papers that effectively turned her world into a crime scene. When the marshals put the cuffs on her for insurance fraud and conspiracy, the look on her face was better than any sunset I'd ever seen over that lake. I got my house back. I tore off that hideous beige vinyl with a crowbar, and let me tell you, that was the best therapy I've ever had. The resort is gone. The Willow Beach sign is firewood, and the lake is quiet again. But sometimes I sit on that porch and look at that bronze plaque. I kept it, actually. It's a reminder. I look at the water and I wonder, how many people are out there right now, living a life that someone else is just waiting to steal? We like to think our homes are our castles, but really, they're just piles of paper in a dusty basement. If the right person tells the right lie, are you even sure you exist? Anyway, that's my death story. I'm curious, though, if you came home and found your life occupied by strangers, how far would you go to get it back? Would you stay quiet, or would you burn the whole thing down to find the truth? Let me know in the comments, because honestly, I'm still trying to figure out if I'm the one who survived, or if the late Randall Denton had the right idea all along. If this story made you double-check your property deed, hit that like button and share it. And definitely subscribe. I've got a few more stories about friendly neighbors you wouldn't believe. Stay safe out there. Don't let anyone sign your death certificate while you're still breathing.